I think Ted may have been 8 or 10 years older than I was. And the first time people said we were going to have a poet and it was going to be Ted Jones, I had read some of Ted Jones' things, like that amazing poem about my T-shirt, the sort of playing around with language and so forth. So I had a definition of a poet, with someone who, jacket, tweed, maybe a sweater vest kind of thing, And Ted came in with the tam, and God knows what else it was he was wearing, But I mean, it was like the Punjab pants and a dashiki and beads and whatever, And right away he said, "Hey, Houston, how you doing?" I thought, he knows me, I mean, he didn't, but somebody had said, "That's Houston," And I was Ted's approach. "How you been, Houston? It's been a long time since we've seen each other," right? Well, Ted grew up with the Beats, okay? Kerouac, Ginsberg, that whole group of people. And when he would start talking about his artistic world and the influence, he said, "We had some crazy people, Houston, in that group. There was this guy who said to us, he was going to write this book, okay, and it was going to be a guide for people to travel cheaply, and that he was going to make millions of dollars, and he was going to leave all of us behind on the sidewalk." And we just laughed at him. He said, "Houston, that book was called Europe on $5 a day," and he did leave us, okay? So Ted wrote poetry that was celebratory of the African diaspora, and he had a winning, extraordinary personality that could establish camaraderie in a room in a minute, and he was completely self-deprecating, right? I mean, one of the smartest men I've ever met, but he could say, and I didn't know that, Houston. He said, everybody in the room knew that, but I did not know that, And I mean, that self-irony that was Ted's. A. Leroy Bibb was reading with Ted Jones at Shakespeare and Company in Paris on the banks of the Seine, and we were living in Paris that year, and so I said, "I'm gonna go and see Ted," right? So I got there early because Ted just, everything filled up because Ted knew people all over the world, and he came in to the room to begin his reading late, about 40 minutes late, as a matter of fact. He wasn't late, but Hart was late. And he said, "Hey, how are y'all this evening? I'm sorry we're late getting started. It's really good to see everybody here," and he acknowledged a few people. And then he became aware that there was someone sitting behind him, right? And this was a young woman who was not of color, and she was sitting behind him. And he said, "Honey, what are you doing? You're behind me. All you can see is my butt, And she said, "Oh, Hart told me this was the best seat in the house." He said, "Everybody knows Hart's an alcoholic." You cannot believe him. He's a decent boy, but he's like, "Come on, somebody get out of that seat. Give this woman a seat up front," right? So Ted was capable of, the ironizing of the self. He was a poet of just prolific. If you Google him, you'll find multiple volumes. You'll find broadsides. He tied into the Black Arts movement here. As with many another genius of our little Africas, Ted had really tough times toward the end. I have a colleague who is sort of in my age cohort. His name is Gunther Lentz, and he's emeritus now. He's retired from Humboldt University. But he read Betrayal recently, and he wrote to me, which is something Dr. Livingston and I were talking about just recently. And he said, "Well, I like the book." He said, "But I have some problems with this, That was then, when you were talking about the public sphere. And there's a different public sphere now. And I think that some of the people you talk about have done tremendous work in that sphere. And the works you chose by particularly West and Gates are among their less significant works. I had to ponder that. I really had to, it drew me up sharply. And in talking to my wife just last night about this, it occurred to me that the mode of presentation, which is why I kind of emphasize that today, of the work that gets sales in the hundreds of thousands like Race Matters is, it's got to be quick, it's got to be simple, it's got to be almost mindless at points, it's got to be filled with jargony stuff like, the love that is not love but is loving. Really just read that? And audiences go like, ashe, ashe. I'm like, what? For real? So I mean, the answer to Gunther would be, it's not what they said. And here we come back to Michelle Alexander and Colin Diane. It's what they don't say. Okay? And I think it's a brilliant observation about the satirists and comedians and so forth. And if you haven't read it, it's a fantastic book. It's hard. It's when I say it's hard, I mean it's hard for me, okay? Partially because of the field in which it situates itself and the vocabulary and so forth. But it's called In Search of the Black Fantastic. And it's by Richard Eaton, I-T-O-N. He's a Canadian scholar, an amazing guy. And he starts with Chappelle as the beginning of his larger political education. Okay, so yes, that. And to the first question about media, again, a book that is somewhat jargony, but I think theoretically is really important, is Jacques Derrida's Archive Fever. And what Derrida talks about, I mean, in a word, it's anecdotal, it's really short-circuiting. What happens when Sigmund Freud's house is a public museum and you're dealing suddenly with computers and the technology of, cyberspace, and you don't have letters, so the archive changes and everything changes, and when you have a media environment like you're talking about now, I do think that there are, and have been, from Spike's independent, the indie film, and Julie Dash, and that sort of Italian neo-realism that, people took up with Killer of Sheeps, Charles Burnett, and so forth. But there are only so many niches, and you're right about that, okay? Once you get the indie niche Negro, right, then you go like, well, we're doing it. We really got it going on. Sundance, the stuff that's being written this year, the Sony Classics has a completely different relationship to that than they did 7 years ago, for example. The expectations of Sundance that you'll get $10 million for an indie film. So this, again, is that sort of constant changing thing. And we don't have, I think this is fair to say, as a people, okay, the venture capital, all right, that the more culturally and economically privileged folk have, so you don't have as many venues to turn to. And foundation giving is, that, right? I mean, after 9/11, okay, the foundations and so forth were seriously crippled. I think that people who are more privileged and in different standing can take a lot more junk than we can. You know what I mean? This is a bad dichotomy, but you know what I mean? The urban fiction is not even up to that I've looked at, the Harlequin romance standard, right? So I get like with my grandfather, and tell me Elvis Presley would rock my mind, and he probably did, and I had to recover it. So every new phenomenon that comes on gets like hip hop, rap, oh, this is the death of our people, we're gone now, all we're going to see is people with their pants pulled down, calling people out of their name, in every black community. Well, the detritus, that wheat chaff thing occurs. The major consideration and the final answer for now, because we'll be in discussion a long time, is I don't mind Barnes & Noble putting up the shelves. It's a consumer market. Who am I to determine what people like to read? You know, I mean, it may be sorrow, it may be grief, it may be this. I'd rather have them reading, okay, than watching Bravo all the time. You know, and I watch Bravo, okay? I do, I watch Bravo. And I read everything. I mean, I love a supermarket line, you know, right? And I say, wait a minute, man, you can put my Globe in, okay? Don't put it in with the meat, okay? Seriously, if you don't read everything, you don't know what's going on. So I don't mind that, but when you put it up as Afro-American literature, okay, and there's nothing. There's no, you know, Daniel Black, there's no Richard Wright, there's no Maya Angelou, there's nothing, it's just all this stuff, Zane and Jade and whoever, you know, these folks are. And that is the categorization that's just like saying, you know, well, we're going to take you over to the Negro exhibit. Okay? You know, that's what we show you. This is what they're thinking, this is what they're writing, okay? This is the way they live their lives. They're passionate as a people, okay? And you say, well, do you have Ralph Ellison? You know, and the sales clerk will have to go to the computer and find Ralph Ellison. Now, how do you spell that? You know, it's 2 L's, okay? Right? So that's my